In terms of design, the Find 7 and the Find 5 share the same general aesthetic, especially when it comes to the clean lines and the angular corners. With that said, Oppo further refined its design in the Find 7, which features fewer accents and is a little bit more understated, especially in the black version that we got to try. With the increase in display size comes a larger footprint for the Find 7, which overall is about the size of a Galaxy Note 3 with that 5.5-inch screen. However, the difference between the two generations is not that significant, as Oppo reduced the bezel thickness on the Find 7. At its thickest point, the Find 7 is also a little bit thicker than the Find 5, probably due to accommodate a larger battery. But overall, what we have here are two premium-feeling devices that continue the tradition started from one and is put into the other. And even if the shell is plastic in the Find 7, we still find that the build quality is very nice, and even if it is a little bit of a bigger device, we find that it should be a little bit better to get used to over time. Speaking of traditions, when it comes to the displays, the Find 7 continues the tradition of the Find 5 in terms of display quality, as the Find 5 was one of the first 5-inch 1080p displays to come out on the market. The same goes for the Find 7 in that it is one of the first Quad HD displays out, and that has a resolution of 2560 by 1440, which is just incredible for a 5.5-inch device. Now, while the pixels aren't necessarily visible on the 1080p Find 5, upon close inspection you do notice the extra density in the Find 7, and we have comparisons of these pixel densities available on AndroidAuthority.com. Nonetheless, the viewing angles were great on both devices and the colors were very vivid. But as a caveat, we did have to say that the Find 7 we used was a pre-production unit and its display was not fully calibrated, but even so, it was still one of the most photogenic displays that I've ever had the pleasure of filming or photographing. When it comes to performance, there were no compromises, as Oppo cut no corners when it came to the Snapdragon 801 processor clocked in at 2.5 GHz and the 3 GB of RAM found inside the Quad HD model. The phone flies absolutely through its user interface, and you can rest assured that graphics-intensive games will be just as smooth. But in the opposite corner, we find that the Find 5 is just aging a little bit. It's not that the Snapdragon S4 Pro is a poor piece of kit, but the chip is more than a year old, and that is an eternity in fast-paced world of smartphones. However, helped by the 2 GB of RAM, the S4 Pro still does a good job in most situations and is still quite reliable even today. As we move on to hardware, we find that it's not just sheer speed that Oppo added into the Find 7, but there are also very welcome additions, especially in the forms of a micro SD card slot that can support cards up to 128 GB in capacity and a large removable battery, all located under the removable back cover. Now, speaking of the battery, you get a nice bump from 2500 mAh to 3000 mAh on the Find 7, but it's not clear if it will be enough to satisfy the demand of that Quad HD display. But the good news here is that the Find 7 comes with a fast charging technology that should enable it to charge from 0 to 75% in just 30 minutes. Granted, you will have to use the included charger, but that's probably a small price to pay for such fast charging times. The updates continue when it comes to the cameras. The rear camera of the Find 7 now is a 13-megapixel Sony Exmor RS sensor coupled with a lens composed of 6 pieces, which should minimize the distortion while still offering a great 2.0 aperture. The Find 7 has an interesting super zoom feature that we got to try out a couple times, in that it takes 10 images and then stitches them together using a lot of post-processing to eventually create one huge 50-megapixel image that has extra detail in it. The front camera is no slouch either, as the 5-megapixel sensor and the wide-angle lens put onto it means that your friends will look good in video chats and selfies. The Find 5 also packs a 13-megapixel camera that we did find quite good, but there are fewer software features, and overall the image quality in the Find 7 is just loads better than what was found in the Find 5. And finally, we move on to software. Now, while both of these phones run what is considered the Color OS, the one found in the Find 7 is very much like the one found in the Oppo N1, and that evolution was already great compared to the one found in the Find 5. The Find 5's rather oddly shaped and rather colorful operating system wasn't quite our bag at first, and it was more than simplistic to say the least, without too many bells and whistles found underneath, but it did get the job done in most cases. Move forward to the Find 7 and you'll find that the UI, while still keeping that rather ethereal and somewhat colorful and somewhat oddly shaped tone throughout its operating system, you find that the Find 7's version of Color OS is actually highly functional. There are a lot of ways of taking advantage of everything that is underneath the hood, including various places to do gestures like the gesture panel, and also even by using the sky gestures, which we demonstrated in the first look video. Now, the Color OS is based on Android 4.3, making the UI of the Find 7 include several of these features textures easily, but we are looking forward to the update to ColorOS 2.0, which should be coming in the next few months. Overall, you see a very good evolution when it comes to the Find 7 from the Find 5, and in software that is readily apparent.